Technology. It's all around us and controls our daily lives. Every day, the average human spends 10 hours and 39 minutes on technology, from smartphones, computers, video games, radios, tablets, and TVs. Nowadays, our cars, beds, refrigerators, maps, glasses, watches, wallets, hell, even our damn toothbrushes are electronic. Little bundles of wires and chips pinging ones and zeros around our world, communicating in frequencies we created but can't understand. When technology doesn't work, it can be an absolute nightmare. However, when everything runs smoothly, when all the processes go according to plan, technology can completely change everything from day-to-day simple tasks to life-changing events. When properly utilized, technology is able to entertain, teach, and do great things. However, what if there was a technology available that was at the forefront of all of these categories? What if you could snap your fingers and go from your cramped room to the top of Mount Everest? Go from learning about the ancient pyramids by visiting them yourself to performing state-of-the-art surgery simulation? What if you could live out your childhood dream by taking down TIE fighters in an X-Wing, then instantly enter the mythical realm of Asgard through the Bifrost? Virtual reality, or VR, hasn't always been at the forefront of immersion, but as the technology has progressed and the concept has finally become feasible on a widespread consumer level, VR now sits as the absolute king of immersive technology, and is on the precipice of revolutionizing everything we know about our current reality, for better or for worse. See, the race to be able to immerse ourselves in a world not our own has always been paralleled by an ever-growing concern for the safety of this new tech. This video will explore how VR got to this point, the current uses of VR, and how the future of VR, well, is not virtual at all. In order to understand the history of virtual reality, there needs to be a definitive definition set of what virtual reality is. I mean, the literal definition of a virtual reality is very vague. I could show you this image and argue that it's technically a virtual reality. After all, you're currently viewing a simulated experience that is similar to or completely different from the real world. But VR as we know it is far different from this one image. I'm gonna set up some constraints to what will quantify as VR for this video. Let's say that VR has three main components. One is two unique images transmitted to each of your eyes to simulate depth, and the second is that these images react to any sort of head movement to help convince you that you're actually in the world of said image. The final component for our definition of virtual reality would simply be that it involves computing technology in some way, shape, or form. With that being said, the first instance of VR in history that fits into all three of our criteria is in 1968 with Ivan Sutherland, and his headset known as the Sword of Damocles. Now take a second to picture what you would see in a headset as epically named as Sword of Damocles. Well, you're probably thinking of something along the lines of this, but in all honesty, it looked more along the lines of this. Despite meeting the requirements for VR, this tech was never made available to consumers as the headset cost a fortune, weighed way too much, and needed to be suspended from the ceiling to function. Ivan Sutherland set out to build the display of the future, but although the basic processes were technically there, the technology was not available to make this a consumer product. Over the following years, big companies like NASA were at the forefront of VR development, as they were the only ones that could justify the price/hassle of creating one of these head-mounted devices, or HMDs. Companies would try and try again to get HMDs in the hands of the consumer, but would fail every time, as the tech just proved not to be ready yet. The most notable of these attempts came from Nintendo with the Virtual Boy. By far Nintendo's greatest failure, this system would literally just give consumers migraines and back problems. Not only was it discontinued after a year, but news of the ginormous flop scared off potential VR investors. I mean, if Nintendo, the company that single-handedly saved the video game industry after the crash of '83, couldn't get VR to work, who could? 18-year-old Palmer Luckey was messing around with prototypes of a VR headset he'd been working on that later became the Oculus Rift. See, what was so special about the Rift was that it had a 90-degree field of view, or FOV. Prior VR headsets had felt more like you were looking through binoculars, but this one made you feel like you were really there, albeit with horse blinders on. After raising $2.4 million on Kickstarter for the Rift, the modern age of VR began. Other headsets like the HTC Vive and Valve Index have pushed the technical limits of what these virtual realities can be. Now we have positional tracking and 6 degrees of freedom. The first 3 degrees of freedom were relatively simple, as they were just the rotation of the head along the 3 axes. The final 3 degrees of freedom proved to be much trickier, however, as they correspond to translation on those 3 axes. While rotation can be tracked by a simple gyroscope and accelerometer in the headset, the precise position of the HMD plus 2 controllers needed to be tracked by external camera sensors. After the success of the Oculus Kickstarter, Sony began to develop the PSVR, which became an extremely popular choice in bringing VR to consoles. Now the Oculus Quest 2's standalone headset requires absolutely no external sensors, calibration, or computer. Literally just turn it on and step into a whole new reality. Couple its accessibility with insanely competitive pricing and you're looking at the current king of the VR space. It accomplishes 6 degrees of freedom without sensors using this incredible inside-out tracking, where the cameras on the headset are constantly locating and tracking the position of the HMD and the controllers in whatever environment you're in. It's truly amazing stuff. Virtual reality is one of those things where technology-wise, it's really all or nothing. It's so incredibly disorienting to jump into a virtual world and have what you physically see be at a disconnect with your actions. Imagine every time you turned your head it would rotate in a different direction, or when you took a step forward in real life you stayed stationary in the virtual world. This disconnect between what you're feeling and what you're seeing is the root of all nausea for VR users, and because of this, the long wait for consumer-ready VR was an absolute requirement as to not repeat the Virtual Boy disaster. Currently, Oculus seems to be the only VR company willing to see the bigger picture. While Valve, HTC, and others are still manufacturing top-of-the-line HMDs that require wall-mounted sensors and $1,000 gaming PCs to run top games, Oculus is moving forward towards a future that is far more achievable for the average person. Of course, using the Oculus Quest, which runs all its games on the headset itself, you'll never get quite the same experience as someone using a multi-$1,000 gaming PC to run the game and seeing it through the $1,000 Valve Index, but you're getting scarily close for a literal fraction of the cost. Now that the dream is finally realized for average people, the real possibilities for virtual reality are just now coming into the picture. While it hasn't quite taken over the world yet, like in many sci-fi novels such as the electric Ready Player One, the effect virtual reality has on our reality is still massive, and while I obviously have a clear bias towards the gaming side of VR, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about a few other areas where this faux reality has really real benefits. Educators often discuss how to best accommodate different learning styles, and it always seemed like an impossible question given how vastly different various kids retain information. One widely accepted model known as Neil Fleming's VARK model describes there being 4 broad styles of learning that most kids fall into. These 4 styles are visual learners, auditory learners, physical learners, and social learners. The problem is how to accommodate all these styles simultaneously. I mean, if you think about it, teachers have a nearly insurmountable task. Lectures, group projects, presentations, dissections, all of these leave out multiple styles, but the emergence of VR in education is already proving to be more effective. Imagine hearing your teacher describe the creation of the pyramids as they loom above you, or watching red blood cells stream past you as you stand next to your classmate's virtual avatar. Virtual museums allow students to step into places like the tomb of Ramses VI, then walking around the Anne Frank house while a young girl narrates her diary with sound effects like creaking floorboards echoing around has shown me the gratitude of the Holocaust more than any textbook ever could. So if VR is able to educate so effectively, why isn't it so widely adopted? Well, obviously VR is in its infancy, and despite Oculus's best efforts, it's still quite expensive. While it is being utilized around the world in classrooms today, VR will truly revolutionize education once the tech becomes more widely available. When headsets are as common as cell phones and kids can just nonchalantly hop into a virtual classroom then be whisked away to the fall of Rome, that's when VR's educational impact will truly be complete. The effects of virtual reality on business are already being felt today. Huge companies have been leaning into VR to train new employees, and they've been seeing incredible results. Hilton Hotels is an absolutely massive company, and training new employees for them used to be a monumental task.
We can truly upskill team members faster and really focus on empathy building, which was a game changer for us.
If we were to try to do this in a traditional setting, when you have 400,000 team members, that is not something that comes in an inexpensive way for us, and nor do I think it's realistic.
Hilton reported a 90% reduction of in-class training time in comparison with traditional methods while using VR. They found that employees who trained with VR rather than just watching your standard introductory video were far more effective in their various tasks. Research and development teams can all look at virtual models rather than spending the time and money producing thousands of different prototypes, and state-of-the-art simulations can help run preliminary tests and rule out potential design flaws before production truly begins. Real-time collaboration is an absolute game changer, especially during a global pandemic. While from an outside perspective it may not seem different from joining a Zoom call, actually being placed in a physical space with your coworkers has been proven to increase productivity and reduce fatigue. Virtual reality is already changing the way businesses operate. It may seem crazy to think that the same technology that allows me to fist bump a shark-human hybrid is making insane strides in the health community, but virtual reality is doing just that. I could talk about how games such as Until You Fall or Thrill of the Fight provide legitimate workouts, given that you're essentially shadowboxing or doing reps of squats to avoid oncoming attacks, but I'd much rather focus on the impact VR is having on the medical community. Whether it's helping to actually detect Parkinson's disease early or calming down child patients by running them through exactly what their surgery will entail, VR is changing how the medical community goes about different operations. Nowhere is this more apparent than in training future operators. Performing a surgery or operation for the first time is a very daunting task for a surgeon, given that training opportunities at this early career stage are incredibly limited. Apps such as Oso VR are revolutionizing how much practice surgeons get to have before they operate on a human. Set up scenarios where something has gone horribly wrong, change the operation, and reset the entire table all with a couple of clicks. This amount of practice can literally save lives, and the Journal of Surgical Education found that practicing surgeons who trained using VR were 252% more effective than those who did not. Being able to practice operating on a virtual patient provides the required practice that future surgeons so desperately need. I've been playing video games for as long as I can remember, and although I've never lost my enjoyment of video games, there used to be this spark I had with every game that over the years has been harder and harder to replicate. This spark was initially what got me hooked on video games, and it can honestly only be described as a drug. This spark happens when you completely lose yourself in the game, when the controller, the screen, and all your surroundings seem to melt away and you're suddenly transported into the world of the game. Nothing else matters except your new reality. People who have experienced this will know exactly what I'm talking about, but for anyone who thinks I sound like I belong in an insane asylum, imagine that feeling you get when you're reading an incredible book or watching an amazing movie, but multiplied by 1,000 because instead of watching or reading a predetermined story, you're making your own. You're in charge of the story and can mold it to be anything you want. Even in games with a predetermined narrative, like the utterly phenomenal Katana Zero, you control the main characters, so when the protagonist reaches a climax and faces his toughest challenge yet, you need to pull that from yourself and persevere throughout the level, boss fight, or what have you. When a video game story is well written, it can pull you in like no other form of media because you are that character. When Madeline has an anxiety attack in the video game Celeste, you're right alongside her in the gondola because you've been playing as her for hours at a time. After a while, the character on screen becomes an extension of who you are, as you've been playing as them, making choices with them, watching their story unfold, and going through the same struggles as them for hours. The name of the game here is immersion, and video games are quite simply more immersive than pretty much any other form of media. When I was younger, I used to get completely immersed in pretty much every game I played. That's why I'd do things like hide my Game Boy under my pillow when my mom tucked me in at night so I could play more Pokemon Sapphire. However, eventually less games gave me that spark. The games I can truly immerse myself in were dwindling all the time, as I always seemed to be chasing that new big leap in immersion. Better graphics, better story, better sound effects, God of War, Red Dead Redemption 2, Breath of the Wild. These are the games that have immersed me most within the past 5 years or so, but these games are also few and far between. I mean, look at the games I just listed. They're massive productions that take huge teams of hard work, passion, and dedication. These sort of games don't just happen, they're once in a generation. And sure, every once in a while you'll get a game such as the aforementioned Katana Zero, which was primarily made by one man and doesn't feature a realistic presentation, but will still just absolutely floor me. I'm talking play through the entire game in one sitting and left slack-jawed at the credits floored, but again, these masterpieces are few and far between. These full immersion moments where the controller feels like an extension of your hand and you've slipped into a flow state of not even thinking about the gameplay are why I play video games. But for a while, my hunt for immersion was stopped. This all changed with my introduction to VR gaming. In VR, every single action is immersive. Instead of pressing the A button to pick up a ball, you can physically reach out, pick it up, toss it between hands, and throw it as hard as you can. The most mundane actions are absolutely revolutionized in VR, since simple acts like putting some dogs on a grill are now an absolute blast. Take, for example, the incredibly simple act of reloading a gun. Obviously, reloading a gun is incredibly important from a gameplay balance perspective and a realism perspective, but when playing games on the computer, reloading is the bane of my existence. You essentially have to press a button, wait for your character to pull out a new magazine, eject the old one, load the new mag, and probably cock the gun again, all while you're probably getting shot at. Reloading only serves to take you away from the fun part of shooting games, which is the actual shooting. Contrasting this to VR, and reloading literally goes from my least favorite part of the game to my absolute favorite part. Sure, the same steps are required, but instead of pressing the R button and watching an animation, you're chugging that old magazine as hard as you can, fumbling to insert the fresh mag and yanking back on the gun rack to cock it. All the while, you can hear bullets whizzing past your head in every direction. Keep in mind, you're not looking at this on a screen. For all intents and purposes, you're there on the battlefield. Your heart's beating fast, hands are sweaty, and it provides this thrill that's just not possible without the efforts of virtual reality. It's a way for people to put on a headset and completely immerse themselves in a brand new universe. Wanna play Ultimate Frisbee in Zero Gravity? Cause mayhem in a kitchen serving sandwiches for fairy tale creatures? Or maybe just play some classic ping pong? The choice is entirely up to you. People all over the world leave their realities and are able to forget about their troubles for just a little bit and just exist in these creative and hilarious worlds that could never be possible without the power of technology. This also brings up the excellent point of multiplayer. You're able to virtually meet up with both friends and strangers alike, and while just as with any form of the internet you meet your fair share of absolute weirdos, sometimes you can connect with the coolest people and just talk about life for a while. Of course, you can play games like Population 1, but you can also just hang out in each other's virtual dorms, meditate, and do yoga with each other, or just sit together and watch a movie on a theater-sized screen. The social aspect of virtual reality cannot be overlooked. Last but not least, please indulge me in a bit of a personal tale. I love Star Wars, and I've loved it ever since I was a kid. I am absolutely infatuated with this galaxy from long, long ago. The amount of lightsabers, pop-up books, action figures, and more I must have had as a child is absolutely absurd. Star Wars was honestly my life back then, and I still listen to John Williams' masterful score on my phone and stay up till 3 a.m. giddy waiting for the newest episode of The Mandalorian. When I was a kid, I wanted nothing more than to wake up one day on Tatooine and suddenly be transported into that universe. Seriously, that's how bad my obsession got. However, I was never transported to the forest planet of Endor. My plastic lightsaber could never cut through my wall, and as hard as I tried, and believe me I tried, I could never do my laundry with the Force. The best part about being a kid is having that childlike sense of wonder accompany you at all times and living life with this absurd whimsicality. However, part of growing up is learning that reality won't bend the knee to whatever you want, and unfortunately, learning that unlimited imagination can only take you so far. So when I tell you that I can sit in front of my computer screen, close my eyes, slide a light headset over my head, and open my eyes in the cockpit of an X-Wing fighting a bunch of TIE fighters by an Imperial Star Destroyer, you can only imagine how that makes me feel on the inside. I know I said I love VR because it's immersive, but after countless hours leaning back and forth in a cardboard box when I was younger just imagining flying an X-Wing, I'd like to offer up a new word to describe this experience: magical. There's no other way to describe it. For me, Star Wars was always that fantasy I wanted to be real more than anything as a kid. I loved the stories, the characters, the planets, the universe, but as I grew older, there was always this slight pain in knowing that obviously I could never be taken to that universe. For me, Star Wars was that escape, but maybe for others, they just wanted to flick their wand like Harry Potter, or train with the legendary Apollo Creed. There's no words to describe what actually being able to enter these worlds, long thought to just be stories, actually feels like. The fact that virtual reality can allow me to live out what has literally been a childhood dream for as long as I can remember is, to put it quite simply, magic. The future of virtual reality is clearly very bright. In the immediate future, haptic vests are presenting a massive jump in immersion where suddenly you feel the world you're in. However, in the long term, the vision for where this technology should go is a little more foggy. There's one school of thought that is constantly pushing for that state of full immersion known as the Oasis. The Oasis, inspired by Ernest Cline's futuristic novel Ready Player One, is a fictional full immersion VR experience, where not only does it look like you're in a virtual world, but all your senses are fooled into thinking you're there. The Oasis is a very extreme end of the spectrum, and enticing for sure, but I personally think the future of VR is at the other end of the spectrum. You see, I think the future of VR isn't even VR at all. AR, or augmented reality, is the future of this technology. So what is AR? Whereas virtual reality will transport you to an entirely new reality, augmented reality is the ability to overlay virtual elements into the real world. While obviously this technology can theoretically be used for gaming purposes, such as 2016's global phenomenon Pokemon Go, the true application here is more so in the daily life of a user. Imagine a world where you can put on your glasses and immediately have an electronic overlay telling you exactly what you have on the schedule for that day. Every notification that your mobile phone would normally display will now be sent directly to you without even the need to reach into your pocket. Something like this truly gives a new meaning to the term heads-up display. The HUD of these AR glasses could do everything from alert you that it's time to go to work, direct you on your drive, or even highlight your destination. Obviously what you're seeing here is just an edited mock-up, but this could be the new normal within the next decade or so. Big tech companies like Facebook are already pouring millions of dollars into this, and they're coming back with incredible results. Facebook's own Project Aria seems to be the company's biggest investment into AR yet, and the demo they showed of it last September remains the coolest piece of technology media I've ever seen in my life. Projecting specific avatars into a shared space using AR and using spatial audio to create near lifelike presence is absurd. They're seriously on some Revenge of the Sith level tech with this, and I can't wait to see how the world adapts when this becomes commercially viable.
For instance, guys, take a look at this wheel clearance here.
Oh yeah, I can see that's going to be a problem. So I can pull out my spatial phone app and write a quick note, and then just hit send, and it becomes a digital sticky note, which I can just grab and stick right onto the fire truck so that we can have engineering revise this later.
AR glasses are clearly the next major advancement in consumer technology, such as the smartphone and personal computer that came before it. And while this technology can clearly be beneficial, there are countless cons that could vastly outweigh the benefits. From a privacy standpoint, all these potential problems could be astronomical. These AR glasses obviously all connect to Wi-Fi and have cameras on them that are able to process the data that the user is seeing, so just like that, big tech companies could have direct access to your vision. Facebook employees have already started testing Project Aria in public, and Facebook claims that Aria blurs out any face or license plate that the wearer would see, but theoretically they could just remove that algorithm at any time. If in 20 years these glasses are as widespread as phones, as I predict, then big tech companies will literally have access to almost everyone's vision in just a couple keystrokes. Moving back to VR in particular for a second, Facebook has essentially already accomplished this with their purchase of Oculus. Remember that Oculus inside-out tracking I talked about earlier, where the cameras were on the Oculus headset itself? Oculus is only able to pinpoint where the headset is by using the headset's 4 cameras, scanning your surroundings, and recreating whatever space you're playing in 3D. Imagine a world where Facebook scans a certain band poster on my wall, and then knows to try and advertise that same band's tour tickets while I'm scrolling through my Instagram feed. For some people, the idea that these shady tech companies can build entire profiles on who we are in order to sell our data to the government or improve their marketing is a scary, scary prospect. Now, as a VR enthusiast, it pains me to admit this, as I just want people to experience the same joy I feel whenever I put on that headset, but it's imperative that I stress the very real privacy concerns that have, can, and will arise from this tech. Naturally, I weighed the pros and cons and personally determined that the ability to enter new infinite realities was worth the potential privacy risk, but that's my choice. I got the crucial ability to make that decision. However, once AR glasses reach the masses, I fear that decision will be stripped from your average citizen. Even outside of privacy, this technology presents many ethical dilemmas. Take, for example, this Korean mom who is suddenly face to face with a photorealistic virtual reality representation of her late daughter. We are quickly reaching the limits of this technology. The ironic thing about it is that as it becomes more advanced, the new goal is for the tech to become less and less noticeable. Simulating reality is hard, but once we create a perfectly immersive experience, we can then begin to rewrite the rules to meld the world to what we want. But as the line between real and science fiction becomes more and more blurred, and technology progresses at light speed, the only question left is when realities begin to merge together, will this new virtual frontier be one where we can truly craft our utopian reality? Or will big data-hungry corporations and greedy individuals cause it to fall into a dystopian nightmare? Even if we're able to create something as unique as Ready Player One's Oasis, should we? The idea is incredibly cool in theory, but allowing people such an escape from their real-world responsibilities could be incredibly dangerous. It's a very thin tightrope for sure, but it's one we as a society will be walking across, whether you like it or not.